She forged documents, called me dead weight, and stole every dollar of our family's inheritance. What she didn't realize was every time she signed her name, she handed me the keys to her destruction. My name is Emily. I'm 34 years old. I was never the ambitious one in the family. I wasn't the straight A student or the one winning awards or the person everyone looked to for advice. That was always my older sister, Lena. Lena was the golden child, 2 years older than me, sharp, confident, and always in control. She knew how to make people admire her, teachers, friends, relatives. They all gravitated toward her, even my parents, though they tried to hide it, clearly saw her as the one who would make something of herself. I was different, quiet, careful. I liked routines. I liked stability. I didn't need the spotlight. My parents often called me steady, but what most people never realized was that while Lena was always louder, I was always watching. Our family was close, or at least it looked that way from the outside. My parents worked hard to build a stable life for both of us, like a beautiful home, rental properties, investments, and savings, everything designed to create security for our future. Then everything changed. Within just 2 years, we lost both our parents. First my mom to illness, then my dad not long after. And suddenly it was just Lena and me, left to manage everything they had worked for. That's when I learned who my sister really was. What happened next would shock even our closest friends. But before I show you how everything unraveled, do me one favor: hit like and subscribe. The more this story is seen, the more power we take back from people like Lena who think they'll never be held accountable. Thank you for being here. Lena had this way of making you feel both loved and small at the same time. She'd offer advice that felt more like gentle commands. She'd remind me to let her handle the complicated stuff, while giving me just enough approval to keep me feeling safe under her wing. I think, deep down, she enjoyed being the protector. But even more, she enjoyed being in control. When our parents passed, first our mother after a brief illness, and then our father barely a year later, we were left standing together holding everything they had worked for. The estate was substantial, the family home we grew up in, several income-producing rental properties, retirement accounts, and a sizable investment portfolio, life insurance payouts that added another layer of complexity. Our parents had done well. They had built something that should have secured both our futures. But as I was soon to learn, large sums of money don't just reveal character, they expose it. In the weeks following my father's funeral, Lena immediately stepped into the role of the responsible one. She organized meetings with attorneys, scheduled consultations with accountants, and volunteered to manage the estate filings. At first, I was grateful. The grief was still heavy on my chest, and the idea of sorting through financial documents while mourning felt overwhelming. One evening, we sat together at the kitchen table, the same table where we used to do our homework as kids. Lena reached across and placed her hand over mine, her voice soft and comforting. "Don't worry," she said. "I'll take care of everything. You shouldn't have to deal with all this right now. I know how complicated these legal things can be." I nodded, swallowing my hesitation. She sounded so sure. Weeks turned into months. Lena would call occasionally with brief updates, always assuring me everything was moving along smoothly. "Probate just takes time," she'd say. "Lawyers are slow." Each time I chose to believe her, but beneath her reassurances, I started noticing small changes. She avoided direct answers when I asked specific questions. She brushed off requests for paperwork. The conversations began to feel less like updates and more like summaries that she alone controlled. At family gatherings, whispers started circulating. Cousins and aunts would pull me aside and ask, "How are you holding up?" "I heard Lena's been helping you manage everything since you're not really comfortable with this kind of stuff." I'd force a smile while my stomach tightened. Those weren't my words. Still, I said nothing. I wanted to believe she was just being protective. I wanted to believe that even though I was quiet and more reserved, she would never take advantage of that. But I was wrong. And by the time I finally saw what she was doing, she had already crossed a line I couldn't ignore. The first real sign that something was wrong didn't come with sirens or shouting. It arrived in quiet conversation on small things that didn't make sense but were easy to brush aside. Lena started calling less frequently. When she did, her updates became shorter, more vague. "Still waiting on the courts," she'd say. "The lawyers say there are some delays." Or, "There's some tax paperwork we need to clear first, but I've got it under control." Each time I asked to review the documents myself, she gave a soft laugh. "Trust me, it's all very technical. You don't want to get yourself stressed trying to read legalese. That's why I'm here." I let it go for a while. I wanted to believe her, but the unease was growing. The conversations with family started changing too. At a family birthday party, one of my aunts gently pulled me aside. "I heard you've been having a tough time handling the estate," she said sympathetically. "Thankfully, Lena's been such a rock for you." I blinked. "A tough time?" I asked, surprised. "Well, Lena said you were a bit overwhelmed, that all the legal stuff was too much right now, so she took it on herself." It was a simple comment, harmless even, but my stomach turned. Those weren't my words. Those were hers. She was building a narrative behind my back, a quiet rewriting of reality where I was helpless and she was the selfless caretaker. I started paying closer attention. The next step was calling the attorney's office directly. Lena had handled all the communication so far, but I figured there was no harm in checking in. I asked to review the case file. "I'm sorry," the paralegal told me politely, "but your sister has already signed off on the major transfers. Most of the assets are nearly finalized in her name." I froze. "My name isn't on anything?" "Well, not on the documents we have here." Panic rose inside me, but I kept my voice steady. "May I request copies of everything she's filed?" The paralegal hesitated. "I'd need your sister's permission to release the files to you." I thanked her and hung up, heart pounding. This wasn't just stalling anymore. She was locking me out entirely. I confronted Lena that evening. I tried to keep my tone neutral, but the moment she opened the door and saw me standing there, something cold flickered across her face. "You're overreacting," she said dismissively before I even finished my first sentence. "I've been handling everything exactly the way Dad would have wanted." "I just want to see the paperwork," I insisted quietly. "That's not unreasonable." Lena crossed her arms, her voice dropping to something harder, sharper. "You wouldn't even understand it if I showed you. This is complicated stuff, and frankly—" She paused, eyes narrowing. "You're lucky I've taken it on. You'd have completely fallen apart without me." I felt the sting immediately, but kept my voice even. "That's not true, Lena. I'm not a child." Her face twisted, and that's when she said it. The words that would stay with me. "You're dead weight." There it was. The truth she had been hiding behind smiles and reassurances. The respect was gone. The mask was gone. In that moment, something inside me hardened. The sister I once trusted was gone. In her place stood someone who saw me not as family, but as a burden, an obstacle between her and what she believed she deserved. I didn't argue, I didn't cry. I simply left. But inside, I made a quiet decision. She would never see me coming. After that night, I stopped asking Lena for updates. She assumed my silence meant surrender. She assumed I'd finally accepted my role as deadweight. That was her first mistake. I wasn't surrendering. I was observing and preparing. At first, I quietly gathered what little information I still had access to. Old copies of our parents' estate plans, handwritten notes from their meetings with financial advisors, even scanned emails between our father and the attorneys. They didn't give me a full picture, but they were enough to show how far Lena had already deviated from our parents' wishes. It was time to bring in someone who could help me turn this around, someone who knew how to navigate this world without tipping Lena off. That's when I found Mr. Carver. He wasn't flashy or loud. In fact, that's why I trusted him. He specialized in quiet estate litigation, the kind that never made headlines but often ended careers. When I laid everything out for him, he listened patiently, taking careful notes without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back, steepling his fingers. "She's made herself vulnerable," he said calmly. "She believes you're incapable. That gives us the advantage." We spent the next several weeks reviewing every move Lena had made, the forged documents, likely signed and notarized in my absence, the transactions moving assets into trusts under her name. The power of attorney forms that, on the surface, appeared valid but were riddled with legal inconsistencies. "She's confident but sloppy," Mr. Carver concluded. "Her arrogance has blinded her to the details." He was right. Lena was smart, but not careful. She believed no one would dare challenge her. That's when Mr. Carver presented his strategy. "We're not going to confront her head-on. We're going to let her walk directly into her own trap." He drafted a new set of legal documents that looked like full estate authority transfers, granting Lena everything she wanted. But buried inside the fine print were critical provisions: binding arbitration, stripping her ability to sue if disputes arose; quiet title transfers that would automatically revert key assets back to my full control after a holding period; waivers of certain rights she didn't even realize she was signing away. The brilliance was in the presentation, complex enough to discourage careful reading, yet legitimate enough that any experienced lawyer would have advised her to slow down. But of course, Lena didn't trust anyone's opinion but her own. Now came the most delicate part, getting her to sign. I reached out after several weeks of silence. My voice on the call was carefully measured, soft, uncertain, exactly what she expected from me. "Lena, I've been thinking." "About what?" she asked, immediately curious. "About everything. The estate, the lawyers, the stress." I paused for effect. "You've done so much, and honestly, I just want this all to be over. If you think this paperwork will finally settle things, I'm ready to sign." There was a long pause on her end. I could practically feel the smirk forming on her face. "I'm glad you've come to your senses," she said. "I'll have the lawyer draw everything up. We'll schedule a meeting." And just like that, she stepped right into the net. That night, as I sat alone in my apartment, I pulled out my father's old letter again. His words had never been more relevant. "Guard your hearts. The world will test you." I whispered softly into the silence, "You always said I was the quiet one, Dad. But you never said I was weak." The signing was scheduled for the following week. Lena insisted on using her attorney, and someone I barely knew. But Mr. Carver had already made arrangements behind the scenes. The attorney was fully aware of the documents we'd prepared. Lena, in her arrogance, never suspected a thing. The law office was pristine, glass walls, modern furniture, carefully curated to look expensive but unassuming. Lena was already seated when I arrived, cool and poised as always. "You made the right choice," she smiled, as if extending a favor. "I just want peace," I answered softly. She nodded approvingly, completely convinced that I had finally accepted my place beneath her. The attorney, Mr. Wilkes, entered and sat across from us. He opened the thick file of documents and began to walk us through them. His voice was smooth, professional, perfectly neutral. "These agreements finalize the full management authority of the estate under Lena's direction," he explained. "All standard procedure, nothing unusual." Lena barely listened. She flipped through each page quickly, scanning for bolded signatures, but never reading the dense legal text that filled the paragraphs. "This is mostly boilerplate," she said, more to herself than anyone else. "We've basically been operating like this anyway." She signed each page with effortless strokes of her pen, moving methodically through the stack of papers like she was approving grocery receipts. Her confidence was absolute. I watched every movement carefully, not with anger, but with focus. This was the culmination of weeks of preparation. She paused briefly before signing the final page. "Are you absolutely sure you're okay with this?" she asked, slipping once more into her familiar role of condescending caretaker. "I trust you," I said softly. "You've always handled these things better than me." It was the last lie I would ever need to tell her. With that, she signed the final page. Mr. Wilkes collected the documents neatly into a folder, giving a professional smile. We're all set. Processing will take a few weeks to officially record everything, but from this point forward, the estate is fully transitioned. Lena stood up, beaming. She extended her hand. I'm glad we could put this behind us. No hard feelings, right? I shook her hand and smiled. None at all. As we walked out into the bright afternoon sun, she linked her arm through mine, the sisterly gesture she used when she wanted to appear magnanimous. You'll see, she said, half laughing. Dad would be proud we handled this like adults. I looked at her one last time. Yes, I whispered, he would be. What she didn't realize was that in her desperate need for control, she had just handed me everything. At first, there was only silence. Weeks passed after the signing. Lena seemed content, even giddy at times. She continued managing the estate as though it was entirely hers now, fully convinced she had eliminated any complications, namely me. Then the system quietly started rejecting her. The first call came one afternoon. The bank's refusing to process my withdrawal, she said, frustration creeping into her voice. They're saying I need your secondary authorization for certain accounts. I played my part perfectly. That's strange. Didn't you already transfer everything? I did. This has to be a clerical error. I'll handle it. But as the days passed, more errors appeared. When she attempted to refinance one of the rental properties, the lender informed her that her ownership claim was incomplete. She tried selling a parcel of land, blocked. Even her attempts to move liquid assets were being stalled. The paperwork was doing exactly what Mr. Carver had designed, quietly unraveling her perceived control without triggering any public alarm. The cracks were widening. Then one evening I received a knock on my door, unexpected, unannounced. It was Lena. Her usual polished exterior was starting to fray. She carried a thick folder clutched tightly in both hands, copies of the signed documents. We need to talk, she said, voice tense. I stepped aside and let her in. For a moment she stood there, staring at me like she was trying to read something behind my eyes. Then she opened the folder and flipped through the pages rapidly, as though hoping the words would rearrange themselves. You knew, she finally said, almost breathless. You let me sign these. I said nothing, letting her fill the silence. There are forfeiture clauses in here, she hissed. Arbitration triggers, quiet title transfers. What is this? I answered calmly. It's exactly what you wanted, Lena. Full authority, full control. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice sharpened. You tricked me? I shook my head slowly. Number, you assumed I was too weak to protect myself. You assumed I wouldn't read. You assumed I was your dead weight. That's not a trick, Lena. That's you. Her eyes darted back to the papers, desperate for some loophole. I'll take this to court. I'll challenge it. I remained still, my voice even. You signed a binding arbitration agreement. You waived litigation rights. Any dispute stays private, just like you wanted. No court, no headlines, no public drama. She stared at me, a mixture of anger, fear, and beneath it all, disbelief that I was standing in front of her with absolute calm. You set me up, she whispered. No, Lena, I said softly. You set yourself up. I simply let you walk into the room you built. The fight drained from her face. For a long moment she stood in silence, trying to summon the dominance she had always wielded over me. But it was gone. With nothing left to say, she turned and walked out the door. I closed it behind her gently. After Lena left that night, she never called again. The silence that followed wasn't loud or dramatic. It was subtle, like a heavy fog lifting. For the first time since our parents passed, I no longer felt her shadow hovering over every decision, every conversation, every dollar. Mr. Carver quietly finalized the estate processing. The properties, investments, and accounts were fully secured under my name. Lena's legal authority dissolved piece by piece exactly as the paperwork had laid out. She had signed away more than she realized, not just the estate, but her ability to contest any of it. The beauty of it was its quietness. There were no lawsuits, no angry confrontations in front of family, no public scenes, just silence, a silence that she had created for herself. Word, of course, traveled. Family members began piecing things together on their own. Whispers of Lena's maneuvering, and my quiet response, made their way through the family circle. At first, some relatives were cautious around me, but eventually their curiosity softened into quiet respect. At a small family gathering months later, one cousin pulled me aside and said gently, "We never really understood what was happening. I'm sorry we didn't ask sooner." I simply smiled and nodded. It's in the past. There was no anger left in me. I didn't need to explain or justify. The truth had revealed itself without me ever needing to shout. Lena, meanwhile, withdrew from nearly everyone. Her reputation, once built on confidence, competence, and careful control, quietly unraveled. She wasn't publicly shamed, she simply faded. One afternoon, I visited our family home alone. The house was still just as our parents had left it, the old furniture, the familiar smell of wood polish, the sunlight streaming through the kitchen windows. I sat at the dining table, the same table where Lena and I once did homework together, where our parents once shared their hopes for our future. I ran my hand gently across its worn surface, remembering my father's words, "Guard your hearts. The world will test you, but family must endure." I had tried to endure. I had trusted. I had given my sister every opportunity to choose love over greed, but in the end she revealed who she really was. She called me dead weight. She tried to take everything, and in doing so, she gave me more than I ever imagined. I stood, taking one final look around the house that now fully belonged to me. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was free.